Everyone, I'm going to get told I'm getting recorded. This is Jason Bordajenko, JB from Megaport. Yeah, welcome to Megaport Live. This is the first of our weekly session. These are deliberately designed to be a little bit more casual, a little bit more informal than our traditional webinar series. It's not replacing them. I've had some people already ask me, are they going away? No, we're doing these run by the solution architecture team globally. You've joined the first one, run out of here in Asia Pacific. Here we go. This is what we're doing. Megaport Live, 1st of March. What's this all about? So this series is in response to some of the questions that we've had, and you'll notice those that have actually asked questions, joined in our customer forums, etc., that we've had some great feedback. And a lot of it was we just want more opportunities to engage with the solution architecture team. And that could be part of something that you're investigating, whether you'd use Megaport, you're looking at some of the capabilities that Megaport provides. You just want to learn more about the industry, learn more about the connectivity offerings that we have and cloud connectivity and the Megaport services in general. So that's what we really aim to get through. And in today's time, we have about 30 minutes. I want to leave some time for Q&A. As this is the first, we may not have 1,000,001 questions. It'd be a great problem to have. If we do run out of time, however, as I said, we'll be looking at doing this in about a week's time, so you don't have too long to wait. A bit about your hosts for today. My name is Jason Bordajenko. So I'm about 8 years into the Megaport journey. Started here in Brisbane when it was just a scrappy little startup. And we've developed a lot of new service offerings along the way. A lot of capability now, up to 850 data centers globally, which is a pretty significant number. And obviously our cloud connectivity is one of the key products. Today, I'm going to be actually talking about the Megaport Cloud Router, or the MCR product, in depth. So fingers crossed for a live demo. And as I said, we'll leave some time for Q&A. I will ask, however, if you can throw your questions into the Q&A box. There's a chat box and a Q&A box. The Q&A box is the one that you want to be using. If you could please do that. We will cover some of those where possible. My lovely counterpart, Ryan Tucker, is off in the background there, and he'll join me after the demo for a little bit of a run through on some of the questions we've got. And if there's something that we want to expand upon, we might actually bring you in, call you live to air. So let's get busy with the demo. Oh, a little bit about me. Jason Bordajenko, as I said, where you can find me, jb@megaport.com. That's probably the easiest one rather than spelling that name. I only have to do it 20, 30 times a day. All right, so into the connectivity model. This is roughly what we'll be covering today. This is not death by PowerPoint. Do not worry. This is live demo time. So we're going to be looking from a customer perspective that wants to start with a multi-cloud architecture. And they'll be doing that through our portal, so portal.megaport.com. If you don't have a login to that, you can actually set yourself up in minutes. It's a very easy process to register. We will ask you to provide, obviously, some identifying information, some billing information if you want to actually purchase those services. And we have this concept of billing markets. So for the demo today, I'm going to be using services in Australia. We will be setting up an MCR. You can see there we have multiple pricing tiers that are available, and that's based on the throughput that enables on the MCR. MCR at present goes from 1 gigabit per second all the way up to 10 gigabit per second. It is possible to combine multiple of those, obviously, if you want further throughput. But if your needs are greater than 10 megabit per second, please give one of our friendly solution architects or salespeople a call. We can absolutely accommodate that for you. Within an MCR, the next piece is connecting the VXCs, or the virtual cross connects, to that. So we're supporting in an MCR up to 25 separate destinations. We're only doing 2 today. I think 25 might be a little bit adventurous. And we're going to be going off to a couple of different cloud providers. I've picked AWS and Azure. They're the most common ones that we see here in Asia Pacific. So that's all the slides you get. Let's go and have a look at the portal. All right. So I'm on the Megaportal, or Megaport portal, portal.megaport.com. And you can see here, this is the landing page, the dashboard, the landing page for the little rocket that's flying around. And this is an interactive map. This environment that we're in here is actually our sales demo environment. So we have quite a few services. We have some MCRs. We automatically display the locations available. So you can see here in Adelaide, the 4 locations, North Island, New Zealand, there's the locations there over to Perth. And you can obviously rotate this map around and you'll see all of the other sites that Megaport is at globally. It's an any-to-any network. What does that mean? You can connect Whether you have a port, a 1, a 10, or 100 gigabit per second port, it's possible to connect in megabit per second increments between those. It is also possible, as we're doing here, to have no ports at all and actually connect to a cloud environment. So let's actually go and order our first MCR. In the tradition of doing live demos, we already have one ready to go. I'll just show you where that is. We'll come to that in a bit. That's my backstop, but I'd love to show you a live one. So we'll actually change that filter to JB Live. Let's go and create it. All right, so up the top left, you'll notice there's 3 buttons: Create Port, Create MCR, and Create MVE. And we hope to do a Megaport Live series that features each of these over time. So guided by your questions and the feedback on today's session, we'd love to know where you want to take this in the future. So once we've clicked on that, we get a choice of all of the sites that we can deploy one of these cloud routers at. It really is a routing instance. And for the purposes of today's demo, I'm going to be filtering that to Australia, and then I can step through and see where those sites are. The one that I've already created in the lab has been Sydney, but I'm actually going to be building a circuit that utilizes the Azure environment in Melbourne, Australia, Southeast. So for the purposes of the demo, I can see the availability here through the different sites. I can even then filter that further. So Melbourne, I can choose, let's say, NextDC M1. And I'll click on that. We don't get a price automatically, but if we choose a rate limit, so this is the throughput that is actually bound to that MCR, it determines the size of that instance. It's not possible to change in flight, so that's one thing to keep in mind. Right size the MCR to the particular throughput that you're looking for. We'll choose 2.5 gigabits per second today, just for demo purposes. We can see there that we're offered some options there, whether it's a month-to-month term. The MCR will be available automatically, so in a couple of minutes. I'm just going to be using a no minimum term or a month-to-month here. I'll only pay for the amount of time that I actually have that deployed. So it is possible to do workload migrations, etc. So let's call that JB Live, and we'll actually build that into Melbourne. And that's really all of the details that I need to provide in order to stand up the MCR. I will just flag, however, that there's another option available down the bottom. We've auto-completed. That's the red asterisk is a mandatory field. And that's our ASN, or Autonomous System Number. And that's important if you wish to use some of the public platform services available. An example of that would be S3 with Amazon, for example. And the reason for that is that they're generally only available on internet-facing IP addresses. Some of our customers don't necessarily have their own public IP addresses. They're using internet services to access that. And one of the most common questions are, how do I get S3 more performant, responding to my environment in a way that I can utilize those public services, but without an ASN? And the good news is that we do that on your behalf. So as part of building an MCR, if you're happy to use our ASN value, it's provided there. If you have your own, that can be deployed. And that gains you access using NAT, which is included, no extra cost. That gains access to that public peering component as well. I'll show you that when we get to the Microsoft piece, how that is enabled. All right, so the great thing is that's now going and building live demo, saying my prayers to the demo gods right as we speak, and that's building out in Melbourne at the NextDC site. I didn't focus on this too much. We do have the concept of diversity zones. So if you do wish to have red and blue zone diversity, which is an offering we've had on our ports for some time now, we can now extend those to MCR. So either building at separate sites within a metro or building into, as we've just been allocated, a red diversity zone. I could redeploy at that same site into a blue diversity zone, and it would be a completely partitioned and isolated set of environment for it. But what are we going to connect to it? I think that's the important question. Again, we're going to start with Azure. So I've jumped into the Microsoft Azure portal, and the connectivity type that Azure uses is known as ExpressRoute. So I won't go through setting up a new key. We can see that there is one that I've already provisioned, and that one's sitting in Sydney, and one that I've ordered but have not yet provisioned, and that's sitting in Melbourne. So if I click onto that, it's a 50 megabit per second service. This is available all the way up to 10 gigabits per second as well. It is a diverse service. So when I've requested an express route service, it actually provides 2 different on-ramps using the single service key. And that's this value here. So all I need to do is click on that field. Obviously, it takes a couple of minutes to provision this service request, but I can utilize that back on our portal. So in that time that I've been talking, that little icon on the MCR has turned green, and that's good because it's ready to accept those connections. So I can either click on plus connection and add that, or for my first connection, I can just directly select where I want to go, which is into Azure. And simply by pasting that key that I copied in the previous step, we'll be able to see where the targets are on that. So for this example, it's actually a really good example. I've chosen an MCR that is within the data center that Microsoft is giving me. We don't actually have control on where those are, but obviously picking the different zones will give different on-ramps to the Microsoft connectivity. You can see there's a primary and a secondary. So that single key can be reused multiple times and split over different MCRs. So let's do that. Let's click on Melbourne Primary. I do want to show, this is not a BGP tutorial. This is not an in-depth architecture session. But the interesting part that comes up when I click on that is the peering type, and I can then tick to enable Microsoft peering. That's actually those public routes that I spoke about with the ASN. So if you want to gain access to those Microsoft public services, just tick the box there. It's no extra cost. It enables those and brings those routes directly into your MCR. So let's call this a Microsoft demo. And we can see that that's set at the default rate, which I've chosen on the circuit, which is 50 megabits per second. And I can choose whether to have that enabled by default. So if I'm doing this in production, I'm adding a VXC to a cloud environment, and I don't want it to affect any routes that are in flight, I can actually make that option to shut it down initially. For configuration, on the Microsoft side, it's going to be able to stand that up automatically. So I can talk and think through your questions rather than actually worrying about configuring it. So an end state for this would be that we actually set up the connection, set up the peering types, and that's all done automatically by the portal. What's the sound of one hand clapping? That's what I commonly ask. An MCR with a single connection doesn't really give us that much, so we do need to add something else. That's either a connection to an existing port. If we have one of those, I could simply click on connection and then choose a private VXC and then utilize a port that I have that's already existing. In this case, however, I'm going to be adding another cloud connection. Just wait for my system to come back after loading that through. But instead of ExpressRoute, I'm going to be using AWS. AWS console is a bit different to the Microsoft side, and the workflow is slightly different, but it's a pretty simple process. The main value that I need is actually already completed for me, so I don't need to set up a key like I do with Azure, and that's my account ID there. So I can just grab that value and bring that back to our portal. So again, that workflow is to add the connection. And in this case, we'll be clicking cloud and our destination would be AWS. Now you do get a bit of a fork in the road here. You get to choose whether it's a hosted VIF or a hosted connection. The newer type of connectivity is generally to use hosted connection. There is a slight premium on that circuit, so it's about 8 cents per megabit per second, but it gives you access to transit gateway and the more advanced routing capabilities. The downside of that is in terms of the setup, it's a little bit more of a back and forward. The hosted VIF, which is what I'm going to use for today, it doesn't give you access to transit gateway, but still allows you to connect to direct connect gateway or the BGW, which is the more traditional model. The good side about this for a test and dev environment is it allows me to flex the bandwidth up and down, whereas with a hosted connection, it's a reserved bandwidth at a particular rate. So you get to make that choice. Still the same process in terms of setup, but there's a little bit more involved in the hosted connection. So again, great reason to chat with one of our solution architecture team. I'm going to be looking to Australia here, and we can see that actually gives me all of the options that are available for the hosted VIF type. Now, the eagle-eyed observers would have seen these are all the Sydney region, so AP Southeast 2, but the peering points, the locations are spread across the country. So we meet the AWS network in different locations in Sydney. We also meet it in Canberra, Melbourne, and Perth. That's for the Sydney region. If I was to choose hosted connection and look at Australia, you'll notice it's not limited to AP Southeast 2, that we actually have AP Southeast 4, which is the Melbourne region. In this example, I'm just going to be using AP Southeast 2, but I'll do so via Melbourne. So these are the considerations. Do I hand off to the AWS network in Melbourne, or do I utilize the Megaport network to get me to Sydney and then hand off in that location? So again, these are design considerations that should be thought about when you're looking at how you're going to architect your cloud environment and obviously cloud connectivity. So AWS rate limit, we'll choose the same. I can note that it's up to 2500 megabits per second, which is the upper bound of our MCR. I'll put this on no term in this case. And the only detail that we shall require, or two pieces of detail to be accurate, is the account ID and that's the one that I copied from my portal earlier, so ending in 9139. This is not a mandatory field, but putting in the Amazon side AS number will be that of the one that the gateway that I'm going to attach to. So I can grab that by going over to the AWS portal, and I can see the values that I've assigned to different gateways. So if I was to look at one for a webinar here, 65101 is one that I have that's ready to go, and I can paste that in there. All right, so I'll add that VXC. And I haven't started deploying those yet. We can see that not ordered on the AWS side is my one that's remaining. The Microsoft one is already building. It has been doing that in the background since I clicked go. Let me start that process on AWS, and then we'll go back into Azure and actually see what sort of workflow that's got up to. As I said, if we don't get it done in time, or if we get some questions come through, we can move to that and then come back to this scenario. But I really want to show you this connection coming live. My goal is absolutely to have that done in about the 30 minutes. So there's no reason that networking should take a lot of time to do something as complex as this. All right, so let's step across now, as I mentioned, to see what's happening onto the Microsoft piece. And all I need to do is click refresh. So what are we looking for here? We're looking for this flag in status to actually toggle. So this is our layer 2, or the VXC or the VLAN becoming live. And we should see that toggle across from not provisioned to provisioned in a minute or so. The next step after that going live at layer 2 is we will actually see our portal start to orchestrate that connectivity, and that's at the private place. So we'll see Azure private is currently sitting at not provisioned. We'll actually see that start to build out. All right, just as I've been talking, that's good. We can see provider status on the Microsoft side has changed to provisioned. Peering location is Melbourne. We know this is handing off within the same facility as where we have the MCR. And after that layer 2 step, then we can start automatically. I don't need to do anything here. I'm just making sure that everything's babysat well. The Azure private environment will actually come live. What does it actually take to talk to an environment that I've built in the compute platform, for example, the virtual machines? There are other steps after this. So this is establishing the connectivity and getting that BGP peering relationship. That's the goal of today's demo. Again, this might be a future environment where it's possible to link your VNets or the subnets that you've created in cloud to link that through to the express route that we've created today. And that's through the gateway functionality, which is a little bit more complex for Azure. It's documented on our website, documented in our docs portal. But the good concept is that I'll show you that happening in AWS. So the gateway associations that I showed you, this webinar one, is something that we can actually join. So currently I've got no virtual interfaces that are connected. But if I step onto virtual interfaces, we can see we've got now an inbound request. So this is set in confirming status. It's great. It's just asking for my permission. So as the account owner, I can step in there and say accept. And in this demo, I know that I want to create an association from that inbound request to the webinar gateway. And the reason is that it's going to be looking for that ASN. All right. So we've accepted that. That's the same as the Microsoft step of showing that not provisioned toggling over to provisioned. We can see that it's set an Amazon side AS number 65101. And the best part is that it knows about our MCR ASN value. So that was the one that we accepted, the default 133937. So we can see that is documented there. All of the IP addressing, all of the BGP keys, etc., that's all been handled for us. So there's no extra configuration step. These will all step through automatically for me. So the good news is, coming back to our portal, I haven't had to click refresh, but we can now see that those individual cloud connections, so Azure and AWS, have turned green. We know layer 2 is up. To step further into that, we can actually click on those individual services, and I'll just walk through these tabs. So the first one is the MCR configuration, and this has all been deployed automatically. As I said, we've requested VLAN 100. So this is a common VLAN. It's on a private request in the VXC. It's a layer 2 connection that is only for this particular tenant. So we've chosen that, and we've issued what's called APIPA, or automatic configuration IP addresses. Most people are probably not using these for BGP, but it does not have any impact. It is solely used to establish the two ends of this tunnel so that they can exchange the routing information or exchange the IP subnets that exist within cloud to the on-premise or the MCR requirement. So this is where the handshake occurs. The other parts of this is the ASN. So ASN for Azure is actually set. So 12076, that's telling me it's Microsoft. And then for local, which is, I'm looking at it from the concept of the MCR, we can see that's that value that I shared earlier. If I start to look at the details, this is telling me that these components are live, and I can even see that BGP at that IP address is live by that little green dot. I can drill in and see the details on the session. So I'm looking at the logs here. That's a really good start. So we know that the Microsoft side is now live. Let's go back into that environment. Let's have a look at AWS, which we did a little bit later. Same sort of configuration there. There's not a requirement to have those individual Q and Q or the multiple layers, but we can see those values, the ASN value and on the AWS environment, as well as on the MCR. And again, stepping in through logs, we can see layer 2 is up, but we're still looking to establish BGP. Great. So that's looking at the individual connections. Another feature that I just want to touch on, conscious of time, we've got about 10 minutes in our session, is the ability to have a look at the MCR, which is a router, from a concept of what we call a looking glass. And a looking glass that allows us to look into the routing tables that are actually declared on the MCR. And we know just by looking at those individual services that we've got BGP that's already running stood up here on the Microsoft environment. And we can see that here by the green traffic light value. We should see that come live on AWS in just a couple of minutes also. If we don't, as I said, pray to the demo gods, we've got that backstop as well. And what that means is we can see the individual IP addresses that have been assigned by the MCR. And what will happen is when both of those connections are live, the AWS values will be sent to Azure and the Azure values will be sent to AWS as well. So that will give us the two-way routing, or the inter-region or inter-cloud routing is set up in that way. If I step back to one that I created previously, which has that routing live, so that's the non-live one, we can see those values. We can see both sides are set up. And if I click on neighbor routes, we'll see what is being provided by those individual clouds. It takes a couple of minutes to actually query that table. I'll come back just before we finish up to look at the express route. So as I said, it will start to configure layer 3 there. The same concept of the looking glass actually exists on Azure as well. So once I've reloaded that, you'll see the Azure public line with those IP addresses, the subnets that have been assigned, and you'll also be able to see what's the route table or the ARP table as well. So it is possible to look into that with a little bit more depth. If you've done any routing before, you've probably thought I've skipped a whole lot of steps, and that's quite deliberately. The MCR has actually automatically configured those values for me. I'll step to the one that I did previously just while that's refreshing. And we can see that those values are configured, and that's automatically done by the MCR, and then it is possible to look at the equivalent from the Microsoft side, that route table. All right, it's finished the refresh now. It took a little bit, a minute or two. And that's actually querying live. That's the reason for this delay. It's going off and asking the API to update those. All right, I think we've successfully done our tasks for now. Let me just reload on this side for the environment in AWS. Make sure that comes live. There we go. So back to the demo, and we'll just make sure we have AWS JB Live, AWS demo. And where's our details? Yeah, that's right. So we now have that, the green dot is showing. So we've actually achieved our goals in the live. I'll just filter that back. And we've set up routing between the Melbourne environment in Azure, which is Australia Southeast, and the Sydney AWS region. And we've done that at 50 megabits per second, but everything that I did here, just by changing the toggle on the MCR and changing the settings on the express route, and obviously selecting a larger would be a hosted connection. In this case with AWS, selecting those larger options would give me 10 gigabits per second of non-internet facing routing between those two clouds. A key takeaway here is obviously using ExpressRoute or using Direct Connect will actually give you a cheaper egress rate, that is getting data out of a cloud. Obviously, one of these clouds will be giving up the data to exchange it with the other one. It will be a lot cheaper doing it that way, generally about a third of the cost of what it would be to exchange that data over internet connectivity as well. Never mind, consuming internet-facing services that might be being used elsewhere. So this is a private path. It's ExpressRoute. It's the Direct Connect, and giving that capability over the Megaport backbone. So that really concludes the demo. Hopefully that's been valuable. I will move to the Q&A. I'll ask Ryan to jump in. Ryan, has there been anything from the floor, or do we have any questions that we wanted to cover? Whilst he comes on, I'll just flag that we have kicked off our Megaport on tour events. These are in-person events that we've got happening around the globe. I'll say around Australia, New Zealand. We've actually had our events in New Zealand. Next week we'll be in Melbourne and Singapore. Sorry, Melbourne and Sydney, and we'll be coming to the other Megaport locations within Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, and of course, as I said, the global locations. So have a bit of a hunt. We'll send details for the attendees if you haven't yet registered. Ryan, how you doing?
Yeah, good. Yeah, so there's a couple of questions.
Sure.
Firstly, does the MCR support firewall rules? Um, so that would be, I guess, firewalling between clouds, things like that.
Yeah, natively, the control is down to that route table level. So it is possible to set static routes or to deny particular routes that are involved, but not in terms of firewall rules in a more traditional ACL sense. We didn't really talk about it today, but there's another product, MVE, so the virtual edge. MCR is, I guess, a little bit of a, my first router product. It's fully managed by Megaport, and obviously that UI that you saw and the ability to easily configure that more complex routing components of BGP. I didn't do any, traditional networking. I didn't worry about typing in the right numbers for the IP address assignments. That's all handled for you. The difference with MVE, it's a bring your own license environment. So there's multiple vendors that are in there. If they provide that capability, and a lot of them do in terms of that firewalling, it's possible to move that decision point into an environment that's very similar to what we spoke about. In fact, the locations are pretty much mirroring that of which we saw with MCR. You just need to run that environment where you'd actually control that. So they provide the browser-based or console-based environments to make those rules and declare them there.
Cool, great. All right, so we have another question here as well. Is it possible to change the speed on the fly once deployed?
It's not at the moment. It's certainly something that we're looking into. Once the speed is deployed, we've reserved particular capacity on a host. So it's not possible to change it because it might impinge on other, provisions that have been made for those particular hosts. However, that said, some of the new changes, and I'd encourage you to have a look at the blog. We've actually listed some of the recent changes in a recent blog article. We have the ability to move VXCs. So this is something where we haven't had in the past unless you go through the support team. The ability now within the portal, beyond what we can get to in today's demo, is to actually take a working MCR. I created a 2.5 gig environment there. Let's say we needed to double that capacity. I could create a 5 gigabit per second environment and then do a hot migration. So take those VXCs without reconfiguring or redeploying and move that across to the new environment. So that's the higher speed. Downtime would be, within the order of a minute or so at the most. So, about a minute to orchestrate, some time for that, and obviously the BGP to reestablish. But in terms of configuration, I've already done that on the slower, the lower speed option. That also allows you to migrate up, down, sideways, however you want to do that. But it's a good question. Glad to hear that.
Cool, great. What have we got over here? And can MCR connect between clouds in different regions?
Yes, it can. So my example was obviously two different cloud environments. They were different regions, so they weren't both in Sydney, and that was somewhat deliberate. I chose Sydney and Melbourne for that example. Sorry, I chose the Sydney on ramp for the Melbourne on ramp for the Sydney region of the clouds, but it can be treated the same way. So region to region, as I mentioned at the start, when looking at the Megaport network, it's possible to connect any to any. So if you wanted, say, West Coast US to Sydney or Sydney to Singapore, for example, even within a single cloud provider, it's possible to do that. It's the same process. It really is pretty frictionless. The only thing that changes is the latency, and we publish those as well. There was a question that I saw an anonymous attendee came in. Sorry to jump on that. You probably have another one, Ryan. What other cloud providers may have that same orchestration, so that hands off? Off that list, the main one that I'm aware of, I didn't get to show it today, was Google. So if you're using Google Cloud Platform, obviously Azure is fully orchestrated, both public and private. And with AWS, there's a little bit more manual workload for the hosted connection. I use hosted VIF, which was a faster setup, but all of those have some degree of that orchestration automatically in there. Any others for us to wrap up, or anyone wanted
Great.
a further dive onto any of those? I think we've come to time otherwise.
Yeah, we're pretty much
30 minutes
at
goes
time.
quick when you're doing
Yeah,
demos on MCR.
yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
Um, yeah, no, there's a handful there, but I guess they're not exactly on the topic, so we might
Sure.
maybe loop back to some of
Yeah,
those. We'll kind of use those to
absolutely.
drive the topic for next time, I think.
Looking forward to doing this. We'll
Yeah,
take this on a rotational basis and pass it throughout the team. So you get to meet different people within the APAC solution architecture team. We'll be having different time zone ones as well for our colleagues in EMEA and North America. But I just wanted to say thank you. Thanks for those that joined in. Hope it was valuable. Glad we could get some questions answered for you and look forward to the next one. All right. Thanks, Ryan, for your
great.
help.
No worries.
Cheers.
Thanks all. See ya. Bye.